Ricky, thank you so much for taking some time just to chat with us, spend some time here at Houston's First Sienna. You've been at the Loop and other areas as well. I've heard you speak at some conferences for youth pastors and things like that. But this is the first time we've had you at Houston's First Sienna, so thank you so much for.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, that's
excited.
Great. Well, just to get right into it, one of the things that we're going to do tonight, we started this event called Parent Recharge.
Okay.
And in this event, our goal is to maybe twice a year take a topic. And so in this case, we said, let's go all the way in and let's talk about gender confusion, sexuality, same-sex attraction, all this kind of things.
This is your first topic that you're
Very
addressing?
first, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Way to do it, man.
I'm looking for the most intimidation possible.
Yes.
And I think we won. Yeah.
Yes,
so
you did.
We've got a crew of parents that are coming tonight, and whether they're some do not have a kid that necessarily struggles or has identified any of these issues, but
Right.
we've also got a lot of volunteers in all of our next gen environments that are coming, preschool kids and students. So we're going to learn a little bit about you tonight, but just as a primer, like how did you get into this? Like what was the origin story?
Yeah. I was called to ministry a long, long time ago, 40 years ago plus. And as a result of that, I started out in youth ministry. I've always had a heart for young people, love young people, really wanted to help them. And I eventually ended up where I left youth ministry, took a job at First Baptist Church in Arlington as the single adult outreach pastor. And so in the process of me being the single adult and outreach pastor in a metroplex, huge metropolitan, environment, I realized pretty quickly that there were people that were struggling with sexual identity and gender issues there in the Metroplex. And I was like, okay, well, what are other single pastors doing with this group? And so I started asking all these Metro singles guys and trying to figure out what was going on, and nobody did anything. And I thought, okay, maybe there's a reason for that. They get fired if they do or something. But then I kept praying about it, and I just felt God really prompting me to say, no, I really want you to deal with this. Now, the backstory of that is I didn't want to do this because I also dealt with that issue myself. It was something that had happened to me when I was a kid. It's something I struggle with. And so I thought, okay, God, I've dealt with that. I've, worked through it. I'm good with it. I don't really want to rehash all that. I don't want to bring up all that stuff up again. But God just kept pushing me, and finally I went to my pastor and said, okay, Pastor, here's what I'm thinking. This is what I feel like God's telling me to do, but I want to ask you because I don't want to be fired for doing this.
Yeah.
And he was like, man, let's pray about this. So we prayed about it. 6 weeks later, he comes back. He goes, yep, I prayed about it. I think we do need to do something, but since God has prompted you, you're probably the one that needs to do it. So figure it out.
Yeah.
So he blessed it and then sent me on my way.
That sounds like a pastor.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, this really doesn't help because I don't know what to do now. So I kept looking, didn't find anything, and finally found the big kind of umbrella organization of Exodus that was at the time still around, and there was a ministry just really right down the block. And so I went and visited with the guy there. Wasn't real impressed with him or what he was doing, but I said, hey, I'd love to help in some way if we can. Long story short, his church sold. The building they were in actually sold and closed down. And so he said, well, would your church be willing to house the ministry? And I said, well, it's a little more complicated than that. We're First Baptist Church, been around a long time. We got a process to go through. So I had to bring it before our entire deacon body of 50 plus deacons, plus then the entire church to have a vote. And we did that. And because First Arlington is the kind of church that it is, they voted unanimously to take on the ministry. So it was pretty amazing that that's happened. And so what happened then was the pastor said, okay, since you're the guy that kind of spearheaded this, we're going to make you as a permanent board member to Living Hope because we want to make sure doctrinally it doesn't go awry at some point. And so that's how I started being involved with them. And it initially was an online forum thing that I did for them that we still have that dealt with youth. And they said, well, hey, you have all this youth experience. Why don't you do the youth section of this? And I was like, sure. So I was dealing with 13 to 18-year-old basically. Well, actually 13 to 25-year-old is kind of what we classified as youth. And was dealing with them, from all over the world. And all of a sudden as I did that, it was growing like crazy. And kids were beginning to say, well, hey, where are you located? Could we come and see you?
Wow.
Can we come talk to you? If we get our parents, to come with us, can we come talk to you? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I started seeing people after hours, in the afternoons and evenings. And suddenly, it seemed to be working. And the next thing you know, our pastors change. We got a new pastor that comes on board. Okay. He comes there. I'm still doing single adult outreach. These folks are still now showing up late and sharing that, good things were happening in their lives. And so he begins to talk to some of them unbeknownst to me, and then comes back to me and says, hey, Metroplex is kind of an odd bird. There are some churches that specialize in single adult and real single adult oriented. We have huge churches that are just single adult churches. And so he said, we're more of a downtown family church. And he said, I don't think that you're going to be happy with the direction I'm taking the church, because it's going to be hard for you to continue to attract singles, even though you've done a great job. We don't have any problems with anything you've done. He said, but what would you think about becoming the director of this ministry? Because at that point we had lost the executive director that had been there. And so I said, well, I don't know. I'm not called to do parachurch ministry. I'm called to do church ministry. That's my call. And he said, well, what if we keep you on staff, but that's your job?
That's incredible.
And I thought, now that's a sweet deal, And so sure enough, that's what I did. And so I resigned as a single adult pastor. The single adults we reorganized in such a way that they went into the life of the church, just in multi-gen kinds of situations and whatnot. And then I became executive director for Living Hope, and have been doing that for the last 17 years now, full time. And was working with them, prior to that 5 or 6 years, but as the executive director specifically for the last 16. And so we've seen the ministry just grow tremendously. We set up 2 different satellites of our ministry. One of those has spun off now as a separate organization. We also had another group that spun off from us that was also doing ministry as well in Georgia. And so, it's kind of grown and morphed and taken all kinds of different forms. But again, going back to me as to why I wanted, why I guess I had the heart to do it, was because as a little boy, I ended up being sexually molested for a lot of years, from the time I was probably 6 or 7 until, way into my teens, early 20s, and by a step-grandfather that I dearly loved and thought was wonderful, and everybody else did too, but we just didn't know he was a pedophile. And so that kind of came to fruition when I was a senior in high school, and I kind of realized what was going on. I actually tried to make myself not be gay and pray away the gay, as they often say. I didn't come from a Christian home. We just had kind of a nominal Christian background. But I finally, when I couldn't pray the gay away, just decided that maybe I should go away. And so I tried to kill myself.
Oh, my goodness.
And a couple of times, actually, and didn't succeed, obviously. But thank goodness. But in the midst of all that, realized that something needed to change. And it was because of the witness of some friends in high school that were in my AP classes with me. Their family was an incredible Christian family, and I got to see Christianity lived out before me. Yeah. And they would ask me questions. I would ask them questions. They never really invited me to accept Jesus, but they certainly were invitational in their living.
Wow.
And so I finally got to the place where I said, Jesus, I want what they have. And if you can do what you say you can do, then you need to do it, or I'm going to really end it all.
Wow.
And he did it. He came in and things began to change. Now, I tell people all the time, when I got saved, I didn't stop feeling attractions.
Yeah.
It was a process.
Yeah.
And so I never dreamed that I would ever be married. I thought I would be single my whole life, and that was okay. I was okay with that. I'm like, I'm going to serve Jesus, and that'll be awesome. But then when I was 26, I met a beautiful woman, and she swept me off my feet, and she knew everything about my story, and she still said she wanted to be with me. And so we got married, and we were together, 30 years until about 4.5 years ago. She died to cancer, but we had an incredible, amazing marriage. Yeah. So it's pretty awesome.
Wow. Okay.
That's a lot.
Let me go back. It's such an incredible story, and thank you for sharing. Thank you for being so transparent. I'm even thinking, even hearing the part of you that says, I don't want to bring that stuff back up. And for, you've heard the term, your misery becomes your ministry. Or, all that personal
your mess
stuff.
Becomes your message, all that. Yeah.
Yes. And so thank you for being faithful and just very, obedient, surrendered with that.
Yeah.
What age were you again? Were you high school when you became a Christian?
Yeah, I was 18. Yeah, I was 18, almost 19 when I became a Christian. As a youth pastor,
I'm just like, my heart's leaping for joy that there was a couple kids in your AP classes that were just, and some families. So you said, if I can just dive into that again, you were able to kind of see what this Christian family was like, right? Mm-hmm. You were able to, I guess, are you just kind of friends? You're kind of hanging out. You're kind of seeing the model. Right
he was he was a guy. He and his family Ronnie was his name. Ronnie and his family were just this amazing Christian family. His dad was a deacon at the church. His mom, ran the preschool kind of VBS and all that stuff. I mean, she was Miss Preschool, person, and just this incredibly devoted Christian family. And so I was always at their house. And Ronnie Keith was he was a piano player, and so I was a singer, and so he played piano and I sang, and we did some things together, and we were just together a lot, and I just saw how his family responded to him even when he did things that weren't right, like when his room was supposed to be cleaned up and it wasn't cleaned up, and his dad walked in. I'll never forget. I mean, his dad walked in and he looked around, and I mean, it was literally like a tornado had gone off. I mean, it was typical musician kind of guy, where everything couldn't see the floor. And his dad looked around and he looked up at the ceiling. He goes, "Wow, that is an outstandingly clean ceiling." And then
what a line!
And then he just walked out. And then Ronnie goes, "I've got to clean this room up," And I thought, whoa, is that how your dad tells you that you need to clean your room?
Wow.
Like, what a change. My dad would have come in, guns a-blazing, belt off, you're going to get it. You're horrible. Why are you doing this? Why don't you listen? But this guy was completely different. And he was like that about everything. I mean, Mr. Sharp, he was a Sharp family. He was just so great about the way he would communicate with us and even talk with me. I mean, he was always really responsive to questions I had, and he encouraged me in the things I did well, and he gently guided me in the things I didn't do right and whatnot. It was just a super guy, And so I saw that lived out, and I thought, wow, this is really something. Like they have something that I don't have and my family doesn't have.
Wow.
And
what a witness.
Yeah. And I was attracted to that. I mean, the way they had love for one for another, as the Bible says.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this is amazing.
It's such a good reminder to all of us who, maybe our kids are bringing those kids home, and it's like, man, they run through our stash of snacks, and they leave a mess, and they don't even acknowledge us when sometimes you just don't know who is walking, and a ministry, obviously, like benefiting so many people out of the fruit of just that faithfulness. That's incredible. So Living Hope is birthed, and you've got maybe some small changes happening since that was birthed, right? In culture, just
a little,
just minute,
just a little.
So take me back to maybe the mindset. I mean, where were we in culture when you were starting? Because in my mind now, it is a part of culture. It's a mainstay.
Yeah,
things have changed so much.
Yeah, when I first started, it was very, very. We were begging churches to let us in and talk about this. Of course. And they were going, "Oh no, we don't have this in our church. Like, we don't need to talk about this because it's not here." And believe it or not, even today, there's still some churches that want to say that. It's not true as much anymore.
Right.
But now we are getting churches knocking on the door saying, "Please come and tell us something about this because we don't know what to do." And honestly, the church is 10, 15 years behind time.
Yep.
So we're just now getting to the place where we're willing to deal with this. And unfortunately, some of the ways in which we're dealing with it isn't very good because we're either coming on one of two extremes. We're either absolutely condemning and telling people they're going to hell if they have this problem and there's no hope for them and there's a hotter place in hell for them, or they're on the other extreme saying, "Oh, this is no big deal. It's just another feeling you have and God's okay with it so long as you don't go crazy." And both of those are unbiblical. And so we're trying to say, no, there's actually a place between those two that is biblical and redemptive and restorative. And so that's what we advocate for people.
Wow. So I guess maybe a good place to start here is if maybe some of our parents, they're not aware of Parent Recharge and they're hearing about this on the back end. Let me just, before I forget it, what's a good way that they can learn more? I know there's resources on your site.
Yeah, we livehope.org, livehope.org. Livehope.org is the website, not Living Hope, but livehope.org. It's weird, but that's where it is. And we have podcasts. So we have a Hopecast that we have 200 plus episodes of that they can listen to. We have tons of teaching on there. I have tons of teaching that I've done. We have bunches of testimonies from people who've come through our ministry who found restoration and healing and hope. And so they can listen to that, and tons of articles, lots of stuff that's free. And then the two things that are on the main page that probably are most fundamental are there's two talks called Why, Understanding Gender Development. And those are the kind of two that I typically do in churches. And those are one of the few things we sell on the website that kind of keeps the ministry going.
For sure.
But most everything we do is free. And so, but those two talks are on the very front page. And so if you have a boy, there's one for boys. If you have a girl, there's one for girls. And I think that will give parents a lot of information, kind of change a paradigm.
That's great. Okay, so livehope.org.
Yeah.
Well, just 2 more questions here. My big question is if you could get all of the American church in a room and just talk to us. Maybe not necessarily. There's the resourcing side and there's some storytelling side, but I think the thing that me and my friends, my coworkers, my cohort are all concerned with is we want to give truth. We want to give truth, but we also don't want to push people away. And so there's a little bit of a push and a pull there. How would you encourage youth pastors, kids pastors, parents, volunteers? Yeah. What should our approach and our posture be towards
I mean,
this
I
issue?
think the way that character is built, as I see it in people, and I've like I said, been walking with folks for 40 years now, but what I see happening is that doesn't happen unless there are deep and intimate connections. Historically, forever, we have known philosophically as well as spiritually and relationally that every human being wants to be seen, known, and heard. And the reality is, in our culture today, we have all become so busy that very few people are actually seen, known, and heard. Yeah. We are often viewed, we often curate things that we want you to see, but we're actually not seen, known, and heard. And so if we can develop intimate relationships with people, I think that is going to solve 90% of most of the problems that we have, to be honest with you. The other thing I think that we have to do in the church, that the American church has done wrong, I think, is that we have avoided conversations of sexuality completely. Despite the fact that the Bible talks about it all over the place, and we have an entire book of the Bible that speaks of it, pretty intimately. Right. And so, to me, the fact that we have avoided it has allowed other people in the world who don't know Jesus to define the parameters and the ways in which it will be discussed. And so it's sort of like the idea that, when countries are seeking new territories, whoever plants the flag first wins. Well, I feel as though the culture has planted the flag first in the hearts of most of our young people. And as a result of that, now when parents and church clergymen try to regain the captured territory, we have to fight twice as hard as it would be if we would have instructed appropriately to begin with. And so I think it's absolutely essential that parents talk about sexuality like they talk about the weather. I mean, literally, it needs to be conversational, and it needs to start from the time your child is born. You just talk about appropriate things. I mean, but you name the parts, and you let them know that boys are different than girls, and why it is great to be a boy, and why it is great to be a girl, and how that is an intentionality on the part of a creator who loved you and designed you, and that your form gives you a function. It doesn't limit your functions, but it certainly does give you direction in your function, and it certainly helps identify who you are as a person. And so I think the church has to begin to really kind of recapture the ground, if you will, and talk about this honestly and frankly. And I think we need to stop hiding behind the idea that, if I say masturbation or orgasm, then somehow somebody's going to fall apart, as though that's offensive to someone. I'm like, no, let's be honest, and let's hear about it at church, because we can trust that.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Every time, we've got a kind of a way of doing things when we talk about sex in the student ministry, and anytime I've ever led, obviously we give parents a heads up. It's like, hey, we're going this direction. Or when we talked to Pastor Greg, led a Song of Solomon series, a few years back, I think. And that's a good topic. It's a big topic to give a heads up on, but it's interesting hearing you say that. I just had a conversation with someone last night, and he said, all I need is the infographic that says, when do I bring this up? When do I bring this? At what age do I talk about oral sex? Right. At what age do I talk about homosexuality? Yeah. And I said, man, I tell you, and it seems to be changing. So I hear from birth, and I'm thinking, because the target keeps moving, the times keep moving. In all transparency, we were at the dinner table, and I've got 3 boys. I got a 13, 11, and 9. And my 9-year-old, 3rd grade, homosexuality came up at the table, and I'm just kind of sweating a little bit, and we talk about things, but we haven't talked about everything with the 9-year-old. Sure. And so someone said, well, yeah, this guy's got 2 dads, and my 9-year-old says, well, so he's gay? And I said, what is your understanding of what gay means? He goes, well, yeah, two guys. And I hadn't taught him that.
Right.
I mean, my
somebody has.
9-year-old
Yep.
learned outside the home
Yep.
what homosexuality is.
Yep.
And so I think the issue is not that we're talking, to agree with you, we're not talking about it too little. I'm sorry, we're not talking about too much. We're talking about it way too little.
Too little.
We're not leading the conversation. And, to my own, I'm like, Christy, we got some work to do here, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's maybe the most practical things that we could hear for parents. We say around here, parents are the primary disciplers.
Right.
And if you're thinking that you don't need to be talking about these things with your kids, you're mistaken. And totally understand, not, talking about burying our heads in the sand. We're just talking about discipling our kids well. Yeah. And then in the church, being able to talk about it. I love what you said about known, seen, known, and heard. Yeah. And I think that I've heard you say, the LGBTQ community is doing that much better than the church is. Yep. And so obviously that's where they're going to find acceptance. That's where they're going to find family and community more than the church. And so we need to be doing a good job of listening and learning names and stories and walking with people and all that. That's really good word. We're headed into kind of people are listening to this after the fact, but we're headed into our event. So thank you so much for taking the time just to give us a little briefer. Again, livehope.org is a great way to get connected with Ricky and all Living Hope Ministry. Yep.
And if you have any, folks have questions, they can always reach out to us on the website. There's a contact tab that they can contact us. We also have online support groups for people in other locations. Like if you're in Houston here and there's, you're looking for help or whatever, we have that for parents and friends as well as those who struggle. We have both online forums that are free and confidential, as well as Zoom support groups that they can participate in, and we have in-person support groups in Arlington and in Denton. That's awesome. So they can participate in any of those.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for following the call. Yeah. And thanks for being with us this weekend.
Thank you for having me.